So I'd mentioned that I wanted to paint the landing gear. You saw the first video on the painting is that I primed the main gear and I also primed the tail gear. These are made out of carbon fiber and I didn't want to see the carbon fiber, so that's why I wanted to paint it. So the real aircraft has something like a metal, looks like a metal, steel, maybe steel landing gear. So in order to get that color, the way I do it, or I like to do it, is I start with silver. This is a silver, and then I just add black to it and shake it up until I get the color that I'm looking for. I don't know the exact ratio. I think I started with the silver. This is actually a silver bottle. So I started with silver and I just started adding a little bit of black to the silver, shaking it up and testing until I finally got the color I was looking for and then sprayed it. I think it does a wonderful job of creating that steel look. It's the silver, gives it that shine, that nice metallic sheen to it. And then, the black darkens it up. I think it does a really great job. If I can, there we go. But I really like the way this looks. It's almost like a gunmetal. My landing gear was looking a little bit too dark, a little too much like steel rather than aluminum. You might be able to see here in the middle. I haven't really done much with that. So to lighten that up some, I'm spraying a very thin coat of silver. Because metallic paints such as silver usually have fine ground up metal particles in them, give them that metallic look. Before I spray a metallic, I'll give it a quick back flush. That way, in case there's any metal particles that have sunk down to the bottom, it helps to push them back up into the paint, and it also helps to keep the tip from clogging up. I'll do this usually after every 2 or 3 sprays. I'll just give it a quick back flush and then continue spraying. I went back in and added the circular or rounded over edges, and I did that with I cut a 3/8 of an inch tape circle and did the best I could placing it between the already painted edges, and then just peel the dot, and they came out fairly well. A little bit of bleed through here, which I can clean up real quick, and so I was able to fix that little issue. And I just brushed this paint. I did not remask and spray. I just used a paintbrush, and I did not thin the paint any. I just added the hardener to the paint, started up and used the paintbrush. I kind of wanted to see at the same time how well this paint flows out when brushed, and it's okay. I mean, it's got some brush marks, so it's not perfect when you brush it, but it sure beats having to mask and paint and go through all that for just this little bit. As I was starting to put things together, and I got my landing gear on the fuselage, and I was looking at the tires. These are the tires that I'm going to use. They're not great. They're from some ARF, but I thought I'd dress them up a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to paint the hub. So I need to mask the tire, and at first, I tried using tape and cut around it, but that wasn't working. And then I got to thinking, hey, I've got that vinyl cutter. Let's do that. So that's what I've done. I've cut out 4 masks, and that sticks down very well to the tire. I'll go ahead and finish using some regular tape so this doesn't get painted. And then I'm going to paint it the steel color that I used originally for the landing gear before I converted that to aluminum. So this will be a steel color. All right, so the hub has been sprayed the steel color. It looks much better, I think, than that greenish color that the hub is molded in. The vinyl mask did a great job. Just a little bit of bleed through, but I'm not going to sweat that. It was certainly much easier to use than trying to cut out the tape. I may weather this just a little bit by dry brushing the hub spokes, maybe with some flat aluminum or silver. But yeah, I think this looks a whole lot better. Okay, it's time to epoxy in the elevator halves and the rudder. But before we get to that, two things. One, after I put this simulated horizontal bar on both the elevator halves and tried to get the elevator halves to stay, it was uneven. I couldn't get the elevator leading edge to sit flat with the horizontal stab. So I solved that, and probably what I should have done to begin with was I just cut the bar in half, or the simulated bar, actually tubing. I took off about 1/4 inch in the middle, and then I'll glue these halves in, and so this also makes it easier when it comes time to epoxy in the hinges. And the bar, or the simulated bar, is still long enough to where it looks like that the bar is still connected in the middle. And the other thing is I get a comment from a viewer, and apparently this person either owns the airplane or is intimately familiar with it, because he gave me some more information about it. The black that we're seeing in the photos, the black on the back and here, apparently this is actually a rubber seal. It's kind of like a gap seal, like how I did on the ailerons, but I used plywood to go over. So what they did, they used apparently some sort of rubber gap seal. I have not seen that on light aircraft before, so I'm not familiar with it, but that's apparently what it is. I got a kick out of this. He also said that when they would snap, and I'm assuming he meant like a snap roll or something like that, that the left half would move out, and I'm assuming he meant the left elevator half. He said it would move out a couple of inches. And I know if I was flying this airplane and that happened, I don't think I'd be doing snaps anymore. That made me a little nervous. But anyway, he says that this gap seal helps to keep the elevator in place as well, so it doesn't move out. So that's actually what we're seeing. And the other thing is, and this is really interesting because my eye cannot see it, but this stripe here is actually a sticker, and it's actually blue. Now I tell you, I've looked at these photos 1,000 times, and this does not look blue to me, but he says it is, and so I'll take his word for it. But I'm just going to leave it black, and call it a day. But the other interesting thing that he told me is that these two stripes on the front of the cowl, these are also stickers. It's not painted. And I thought, wow, because the color match is absolutely perfect. So anyway, it's a little bit of interesting trivia. I'll show you briefly how I glue in my hinge points. Anyone that's ever used these type of hinge points probably used the same method. About the only real difference I've ever come across is the glue used. I use epoxy. I have heard of people using canopy glue. I think I've even heard of people using the polyurethane expanding glue, like the Gorilla Glue. I can see using the Campy glue, the expanding polyurethane, I'd be real hesitant to use because too much and that stuff starts coming out and can interfere with the hinge barrel and therefore, prevent smooth movement with the hinges. Anyway, the first thing that you should probably do, but I'll tell you right now, I do not do it, is to wipe down these hinge points with either alcohol or acetone. I believe they're plastic, and if they're molded plastic, it means there's probably some sort of mold release wax in the molds, so the acetone or alcohol would get rid of that. But again, I tell you, I've never done it and haven't had a problem yet. So the next thing is what we need to do is to put a little bit of lubricant inside the hinge barrel. I've heard of people using oil. That would work. I'd just be afraid of the oil dribbling down. You really don't want to get any of that on the barbs themselves. So I just use a little dab of Vaseline. All you need is just a little bit of a dab. Doesn't take much. And then I use a heat gun to liquefy the Vaseline and get it to run down inside the hinge barrel. That's why if you use Vaseline, just a little dab will do you. Too much, and that'll be about the same as using oil. It could possibly run all over. And you can really tell when you've got it in there because this, you see how it just flops over on its own? You've done a good job with that. So I'm going to go ahead and do all the elevator and the rudder hinge points at once, and I'll bring you back. All my hinge barrels have got the Vaseline on them. I'll be using 30-minute epoxy for this, and I'll make up 3 separate batches, one for one elevator, one for the other one, and then one for the rudder. I've already mixed up my first batch, and when I do this, again, you don't really need to put a whole lot on. I just get to the last barb before the knuckle, stick some on, and then I'll put a little bit in the mating hole in the control surface. Some of this will inevitably get squeezed out a little bit. I actually need a smaller bamboo skewer for this. All right, pop it in. Now a little bit on the other side of the hinge point. All right. I give it a full range of motion. That way, if this hinge point isn't exactly square in, if it's canted a little bit, by giving it a full range of motion, it'll automatically center it up so that you won't have any binding in the hinge knuckle. And then next, what I like to do is to try to make sure that these surfaces are flush with each other. I'll use either some plywood or in this case some tongue depressors and put the tongue depressor right on the end. Now this is tapered so you won't get this flush, but what you're worried about is this up here. Same on the other end. This usually requires a long clamp. That looks to be pretty good. All Alright, so we have the motor in the ESC pretty much where we want them. Motor had already been determined, when I did the cowl. The ESC, I'm using a Hobby Wing 150 amp ESC. And I made a little hole for the wires to pass through. This is some heavy duty heat shrink. It starts out at 1 inch and shrinks down to 1/2 inch. So that protects the wires from any chafing. I have had servo wires chafe in a wing before, so I pretty much, anytime I've got a wire going through any kind of former or rib or anything, I'll have either a wire conduit or some sort of heat shrink to protect it. The ESC is just bolted, it's just tied in with some zip ties. Now this back zip tie I may have to move. These Hobby Wings come with a fan, external fan, which you can mount, and it would go right about there. I would have to get rid of this zip tie, but no big deal. I can always add some foam underneath, and that'll keep the ESC very well secured. So that pretty much takes care of the business end. And this area right here, I still haven't closed off. The plans called for plywood, a plate right here. I had it in there and then I took it out, I think, when I was working on either the battery hatch or the wing or something. At any rate, I haven't put it back in yet. So if I did add it, I would probably add it and then have a big hole to allow for cooling air to get in for the ESC. I still have the fan that I can mount to the ESC. And there's one thing that, this is our electric airplane, and they always say with electric airplane you should have an exit. Well, I got to tell you that I don't think any of the models that I've built and the ones that I've had, like ours, that have been converted that did not have exit holes, I don't have exit holes for the air to escape. Now there's plenty of room or openings where the air can go through the hatch and then go across the battery and then kind of go back into the fuselage somewhere. But I'm not going to add any other holes for the air to escape. So, I've never really had a problem with that. And I don't work my motors hard, and I don't work my ESCs hard, and I always have lots of headroom. I think the maximum amps that eCalc calculated for this motor prop combination was about maybe 120. So I've got, a lot of headroom if this is 150 amp ESC. But we'll check it. I'll check it out to the flights and see what the temperature is and kind of go from there. The spinner's original color was blue, dark blue, very close match to the blue paint. But I had some blue left over, so I decided I would go ahead and spray it as well. I gave it a coat of white primer, and then I sprayed the blue. This time I thinned or reduced the blue basically 50-50. 1 part paint, 1 part thinner. The paint guy told me 2 parts paint, 1 part thinner, but I found the basically 50-50 ratio. It sprays much better. You do have to keep in mind that being so thin that you are basically 1 spray away from a run. I gave it 3 light coats, and I waited 5 minutes between coats to allow the paint to flash. And it's been about an hour and a half now since I painted this. Most of it has flashed off. And you can see it's really nice and smooth. I mean, it's really super smooth, and I'm really happy with it. One thing, let's see if I can find it. Taiwan is semi-tropical, and I do have to spray outdoors. So I will get bugs. There we go, there's one. I will get bugs every now and then in the paint. There's another one. And there's not really much I can do. They got these little teeny tiny black bugs here. And they're worse than mosquitoes when they bite, but they manage to find their way into the paint every so often. That's what's happened here, unfortunately. Nothing I can do about that. So yeah, perfect color match. And you might be able to see, you can see that orange peel in the cowl and how the spinner is much, much better. You know, I am somewhat tempted to sand off all the blue and the yellow and repaint this whole model now that I've kind of sorted out the viscosity. But I won't. I need to move on with other things. All right, so I think it's about 16 months after I started this build. The build and the model are complete. Well, almost complete. I still have to decide on what I'm going to do with the speed fairings. I have started on a plug for it. Been working on it a little bit, but for all intents and purposes, this build's complete, and I'm not going to wait to fly it for those speed fairings. Overall, she looks pretty good. One thing that I have found about this paint is it is very slippery. It is almost like it's made out of Teflon. And the problem with that is trying to put the wing to the fuselage. The wing keeps sliding around on the fuselage, and it's starting to chew at my fairing. I actually have a little bit of a chip, or not a chip, a cut right here, a crack. I think I can close that with some CA, but I can see right now that my fairing is not gonna do well, especially at the field where it's always a little bit windy. I'm gonna have some real issues with this wing, trying to hold it while I connect the control leads. But let's show you the controls. Let's do the ailerons. Everything is smooth. I'm happy with that. The elevator. The rudder and the tail wheel steering. See if I can get the whole shot in here. I'll be interested to see how this rudder steering works with the springs on the pavement. I'll do that when I take the model outside. And then finally, the flaps, which is what this build was all about. They work well in the shop here. So going half flaps. And then full flaps. The Pro Modeler servos I'm using are very quiet, which is nice. The flaps don't seem to rack on the way down or on the way up, and that was really my biggest concern with this linkage, is that one would get out of sync with the other one. They would rack, but they don't seem to do that. So that makes me happy. I don't really see how it would change in flight because air load should be the same on both sides, so I think they're going to be okay. And then the one last thing, remember I guess it's 2 or 3 videos back, I mentioned how my flight controls were all a little bit warped, and so I tried to unwarp them, and apparently that warp has kind of crept back in, so I don't think there's really much else I can do about that. And you'll see how the aileron and the tip are not really mating up on either side. So what I've done is I'm going to mate the aileron with the flap on each side, fly it, and then see what kind of trim I need and see how she looks. I'm hoping that it's just the tips that are off, but I know that is just wishful thinking. Anyway, the last thing to do is the balance and check, CG check, and I'll be doing that next. All right, I'm up to the center of gravity check, balance, and then check the weight. I'm using a Vanessa rig for this. Instead of trying to explain the Vanessa rig, I'm sure you can Google and read all about it. My Vanessa rig is on a little pulley system, which comes over, and then here I can grab hold of the end, allow me to raise and lower the model. Now, for the holding lines, You can have it really anywhere from the front of the wing forward. You could have it up here on the spinner if you wanted, and you can have the back line all the way back to the tail. But just having it here works as well. It doesn't really matter where you have the line set, as long as they're on one side and the other side of the CG. I couldn't really have it back on the tail because of my simulated bracing wires. The wire would have broken my simulated bracing wires. So this is the way I have it set up. When you do it, I have I think about 4 or 5 wraps on each side. You're supposed to be kind of a same number of wraps on each side, so that when you make adjustments, and you make adjustments by rotating the dial, it makes each side the same. You really want to make sure while you're doing this that you have the wings level, not kind of in a roll. So to set this up, after you get it up in the air, first thing I do is I take a spirit level. And this is nice because this is a flat plate stab. So I just set the spirit level on the stab. If I had an airfoiled shaped stab, then I use a Robart incidence meter, put it on the front and the back, and then just zero out the bubble, make sure the bubble's in the center. But then I would take my spirit level, I'd still use a spirit level, and I would move it along the horizontal stab until where the bubble in the spirit level was centered along with the bubble in the Robart incidence meter. Then you can remove the Robart incidence meter and just use the spirit level again. So my center of gravity is, from the plans, it's 4 1/4 inches back, and that's the leading edge of the tape. The hardest part about this whole Vanessa rig is everything just really takes a while to settle down. And I have my battery. This is going to be kind of hard for me to show you because I have to go all the way around the shop to get to the other side. But the battery is about the middle of the battery compartment. So with all of that done, and again, it's kind of hard to get this thing. Basically, you can see that my pendulum, and then the pendulum is also hanging from the bar here. I guess some people, when they do this, they have the plane inverted and they have the pendulum hanging from the middle. This works just as well, but you do have to take into account that the string is on the front part of the dial. This is a 10 millimeter dial, so when I do the CG, I have to actually subtract 5 millimeters to be the center of the dial. Alright, and then one other thing is you want the dial to be basically in line with the wing. You don't want it to be canted one way or the other, because that will affect where the plumb bob sits. So basically right straight along the wing. And so when I did that, you can see that my initial CG is basically, if you take into account the 5 millimeter to be the center, this would actually be about 1/4 inch and roughly 1/2 inch too far back. So let me go around the other side, reposition the battery, and we'll show you how to change the attitude of the aircraft when you do add or subtract. So I moved the battery as far forward as I could. And you can see with that it pretty much puts the pendulum right on the tape. However, one thing you have to take into consider is how it changes the attitude, longitudinal attitude of the fuselage, and the bubble is now a little bit back. So what I need to do is to rotate the dowel, causing the tail to sit down a little bit and thereby putting the bubble back in the middle. I don't think I'm going to be let's see if I can do this with 2 hands. I'm just going to move it a little bit. It doesn't take much, like maybe 1/8 of an inch or so. We want the tail to sit a little more tail down. And that not quite enough. A little bit more. Twisting it counterclockwise. Let's try that. All right, I'm gonna have to let this settle out. I'll bring you back. So the model has settled out. It's been about a minute, and you can see the bubble now is pretty much right in the middle. And if you come up here again, double checking and make sure that now you can see here that my bar is not quite parallel with the wing. So I need to adjust that just a little bit. Okay, so the dowel is pretty much right in line with the wing. So when you look at all that, I think my bob is right on the leading edge. It still bounces around a little bit, but if you average it all out, and I don't bump the model, it's right at the leading edge of the tape. You can take my word. There we go. So yeah, you can see it's right at the leading edge, which is right at the CG mark. And then I just kind of step back and take an overall look. It's slightly nose down, or it appears to be slightly nose down. So I think this will be a good starting point. And then one last thing about the spirit level. Yes, it does weigh a little bit. It's not a lot, but there is a little bit of weight on the tail. But in this case, it's actually going to help you, because once you get your nice CG position set, when you remove the spirit level, it's actually going to make the tail rise up a little bit, which then helps your CG a little bit. You might be able to tell from averaging out that the plumb bob is now a little bit forward. So having that spirit level on the back does not hurt. And now for the really bad news. This thing, using my cheapy fish scale, came out to 12.5 pounds. Wow. I think the prototype was about maybe 11 pounds. I tell you, this automotive paint, it surely added a lot. I was feeling really good about the model before I painted it. But the fish scale doesn't lie, does it? After reviewing the construction article in the magazine, the weight range listed was from 10 to 15 pounds. So I'm right in the middle, right at 12.5. So I guess I shouldn't feel too bad about that. I was hoping more for about 11. So we'll just have to fly it and see how she does. Wrapping up the very last of the construction. Now that I have the dog, I know it's time for dinner. Just give me a second. Now that I have the balance, I can do the battery tray. And the balance showed me that my lightest battery needs to go all the way up front, up here. But I can have other heavy batteries, and so I wanted to make a longer tray to allow me to move the heavier batteries back so it doesn't get too nose heavy. So this tray is 9 inches long, and it ends up being just a little bit too long. I can't actually slide the battery in from this way. I'll show you in a second here. But anyway, this is 3mm ply, light ply, and then I have 3mm pads on the bottom. This is to give room for the Velcro. And so the hold down up front here is going to be a 3mm thumb screw, and it's just going to go into a T-nut in the bottom. And then on this end, I have a little 3mm piece of ply on its edge, and the idea then is that when the battery tray goes in, it slides up underneath that little tongue right there. So with the tongue in the front and the thumb screw in the back, this keeps the tray from moving around. I know it's very simple, very rudimentary, but it works. I do this with almost all of my electric models. It works. Now to get this in, because the tray is 9 inches long, it's really a little too long. I can't actually get it in without the tray wanting to contact the forward part of the canopy. So to put this in, I have to sort of angle it in a little bit this way. But it angles in like so, and then goes forward. And kind of hard to do with one hand, but I think you get the idea. Goes up underneath the tongue up front, and then the little thumb screw goes in, and very snug. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. It does flex a little bit, but I'm not really worried about that. I mean, I think you'd have to pull some serious G's to do any damage to this ply, and it's sort of held in check underneath here because there's not much room between the battery and the former. So anyway, I know, very rudimentary, very, very basic, but it works and it's simple. And so that's it. The model construction is completely complete.